Fill patterns give you the ability to repeat an object within another object over and over again in a pattern-like fashion. If we look in our swatches palette, you've got your solid fills, you've got your gradients, and our repeating patterns are here at the end. If you select an object and choose another repeating pattern, you can see what it will look like. If you want to load some more predefined fill patterns, you can click at the very bottom left-hand corner, go down to the Patterns menu, and you've got some decorative patterns, some basic graphics, and some natural patterns. Remember, when you open up these different swatches and you click on them, not only will you see what they look like, but those new swatches will be added to your regular swatches palette. If you want to create your own basic fill patterns, it's very simple. You can make these from any type of object that you wish, and it doesn't have to be a single object. You can have multiple compound objects as well. The easiest thing to do is to take an object, say this red flower, drag it into the swatches palette. Now you can see a new swatch has been created. So to apply it, select your object and the new swatch, and now you can see what it'll look like. A basic pattern will repeat in a left to right, up and down grid fashion. Also notice the size of the pattern is dependent on the original size of the object that you have. So if I wanted this flower to be smaller, well, I need to scale it down and then save it as another swatch. Once I apply that swatch, now it's the new size. But you can do a lot more with this in Illustrator, especially the newer versions of Illustrator, CS6 and newer, have a great tool that makes patterns a lot easier. So I'm going to use these three different flowers that I've colorized. In this exercise, I've given you a variety of flowers. You can use these or you can make up your own patterns. But for these, it'll help you out to go a lot quicker. So to get started, we're going to select the object or group of objects that we want to work with. In this case, I'll start with the red flower. Go to Object, down to Pattern, and choose Make. With the object selected, we're now in the Pattern Editor mode. Notice that the Pattern Options palette is opened up, and also at the top of our screen we've got several different options to save a copy, done, and cancel. We'll use these buttons once we're finished. Within the pattern options, you can see how this will affect your pattern setup. By default, it'll be in a basic grid pattern, left to right, up and down. You can give your pattern a name, so I'll call this red flower. You can choose the type or style of grid, so in this case it doesn't have to be a regular grid, it can be a brick style grid where they're offset a little bit, or it can be a hexagonal type grid. I'll turn it back to here. Additionally, you can set the width of your grid and how the tiles will overlap each other. At the very bottom, you can see the little preview of how many copies it should make. In this case, it's doing 5 by 5, but if you wanted, you could have more or you could have less. In general, I like to keep it at 5 by 5. You can also have a more or less preview of the transparency by changing it up from here. The next thing to be aware of is this little icon up here. If you click on it, this will allow you to expand the work area around your pattern, and you can move everything out and give it a little bit more space. If you move it closer in and allow it to overlap, this will allow your pattern to overlap one another, creating some very, very unique and dynamic style of patterns. If that's what you like, once you're finished, you can do either save a copy, and this will keep you in pattern mode, or you can click Done. Now I can look in my pattern or swatches palette and see my new pattern is selected. Let's test it out. So instead of having this one, if I wanted an overlap pattern, this is what this would look like with it overlapping. Okay, so that's nice and simple. Let's get a little bit more complex. If you throw in multiple objects, especially if they're different sizes, different opacities, or even different blending modes, sometimes you'll get some very, very unique outcomes. So I'm going to take this one, maybe drop the opacity of it. We'll drop the opacity of this one just a little bit, and do the same for this one. Okay, 3 different colors, all overlapping each other. I'm going to select all of them. Remember, go to Object, down to Pattern, choose Make. So we'll open up our Pattern Editor. Now let's choose a different style of grid. Let's do a hexagonal style. This will put them on each side. I can also turn on my editor by clicking this little icon. and we can move it in and have them overlap one another. Since I've changed the opacity, you can see how they're overlapping each other with different styles of opacity. And this is great because now it's a little bit more dynamic as far as how things should look. I can make it a little bit more scrunched up, a little more spread out. That looks good. We'll say done. Now I've got a new pattern saved in my swatches, and let's apply it to my fill color. And this is what this pattern would look like. Creating patterns is the type of thing you just want to play around with, and some of them are a little bit more complex, but keeping it simple tends to work best. For this exercise, I want you to create a different style of pattern for each of the little areas that I've given you: a grid pattern, a brick pattern, and a hexagonal pattern. Remember, you can use the flowers that I've given you, or you can make up your own style.